Chapter 5 of The Miserable Life of Bernie LeBaron. Blood on the Leaves. That's enough, Miss Riley said. Sit down, Bernie. She turned her gaze on the stork. And Brock, keep your comments to yourself. I dropped into my chair and glared at Brock, the big ugly stork. I wanted him to know I wasn't afraid of him. The draft horse boy stood, his shirt stretched tight over his biceps. Carl Gantz, he said. I'm a bodybuilder and a strongman competitor. I'm unique because I'm the only 14-year-old in Massachusetts who can press over 300 pounds. Dang, this guy could bench press 3 of me. I shrank down in my seat. He made me feel real small and kind of useless. I perked up when the brown-headed beauty stood up, though. I figured she would tell us that she was unique because she had longer hair than anyone in New England, but she didn't. My name is Tatiana Suarez, she began. I love music, and I'm going to be an entomologist. Because I'm a science freak, I knew what she meant. She must have seen a lot of puzzled expressions because she continued with an exaggerated sigh. An insect specialist, she said. Like spiders? Someone asked. Spiders belong to the class of arachnids called Arachninae with over 40,000 known species, she said. Dang, someone blurted. In my book, any girl who wasn't afraid of spiders was just cool. Spiders scared the crap out of me. Well, so did girls, but that was different. The first day of school was pretty much a waste of time, at least as far as education went. We went through the routine of getting our lockers assigned and the padlocks that went with them. By the big deal they made about the stupid padlocks, it seemed like they were prepared to execute us if we lost them. Then we'd assign a pledge that we wouldn't cheat or do drugs, and another that said we would try our best in all of our classes. I tried to work out why they thought a simple signature was going to stop someone from cheating or doing drugs. I mean, if a person is already a cheat or an addict, they aren't really going to pause before popping some pills or copying someone's assignment and say, oh shoot, I can't do that, I signed a pledge. My English teacher, Mrs. Grimm, wore a tight black dress with a cherry red belt. She couldn't have given a better impression of the black widow spider if she had tried. Her small head bobbled from side to side as she tottered about on her stick-thin legs, her feet trembling in the cherry red high-heeled shoes. Her voice boomed. Shut up and sit down, she bellowed. I fell into my seat. I mean, I'd never seen a teacher start off the first day of class that way. We're here, she began, to make you speak, read, and write like human beings. I'm sick to death of the mummified prose and chicken scratch writing I get from people like you. I figured it wouldn't do any good to ask her what the heck mummified prose was. She paced the room with such an air of command that I felt like shouting, yes, sir, like they do in the army, but I restrained myself. She kept booming while she paced. If I have to make your lives miserable to teach you to write like human beings, then I will. She turned to face us, and my heart sank. I hadn't thought my life could get any worse until that moment. There was something truly frightening in her gaze. I don't want to hear about your petty little problems, she said, and I don't want to see them. I don't care how much homework you have, and I don't care about your failed romances. She glared at us. I'm going to introduce you to the greatest literature in the English language. If you don't like it, it's only because you're uncultured swine and I don't want to hear it. Any questions? Well, I didn't know what to say to that. I figured I was pretty much an uncultured swine already, so I didn't stand much of a chance. The class remained very quiet. If only I had known what Mrs. Grimm was going to do to me that year, I could have made my escape then before it was too late. My science teacher, the turtle, was named Harry Woolley. His voice never changed pitch and his face never changed from its disinterested expression. I don't know if he was permanently bored, but just the sound of his voice made me sleepy. Okay, everyone, he said. Take your seats, please. He didn't wait for us to get settled. He just kept talking in the drawling monotone. My name is Mr. Woolley. Anyone want to guess what my favorite animal is? Silence ensued until someone said, a giant land tortoise? A few people chuckled. Mr. Woolley turned his head in a slow motion toward the voice and blinked. A woolly mammoth, he said. We looked at each other in dumb silence. I mean, was that supposed to be funny? He sighed. You people have no sense of humor. He shook his head. This year, the school board has determined that we will catch up with the Japanese in science, which means all of you will be doing an advanced science fair project, due in January. People groaned. I sat up straighter. Now we were talking. I already knew what I wanted to do, and my cameras were going to help me to do it. We did the normal gym introductions in the locker room where they forbade us from wearing perfume or cologne because it could trigger someone's asthma. This, of course, meant that we all smelled like dirty socks by the time class was over. Some big kid got too close to me, and I swear he smelled like those vinegar potato chips. It was nauseating. We had 2 gym teachers who alternated teaching the different units. Mrs. Anderson had bigger muscles than anybody I had ever seen. I mean, she didn't even have to flex, and her bicep was bigger than my thigh. Okay, that might not be saying much since my body was still stretching to try and catch up with my big round head, but still. She was enormous. I thought she might be a bison until she opened her mouth to speak. For a minute, I thought something had gone wrong, like my hearing had suddenly malfunctioned. After a few confused moments, people started laughing. They fell silent when she glared at them. I don't know if she had an accident while lifting weights or what, but she still had the voice of a child. It was high and squeaky like a 3-year-old's voice. The voice of a child and the body of a man. I felt a little sorry for her, even if I did envy her bulging biceps. I tried to imagine her as a cross between a bison and mouse, but it didn't work. The other coach, Mr. Valentine, was the exact opposite of Mrs. Anderson. He was about as skinny as I was, but a lot taller, definitely a giraffe, and his voice was deeper than the ocean. It grumbled and rumbled as he spoke. After the introduction, we started with a short basketball lesson. Madison, the cheerleader, was the best shot in the class. Her copper hair bobbed back and forth as she dribbled and shot. Brock thought he was cool because he could jump up and touch the rim, but he couldn't dunk yet. Carl just threw the balls so they flew like rockets at the glass backboard. I thought he was going to shatter the thing. I could jump high enough to get my hand about a foot away from the net, and I could bounce all my shots off the bottom of the rim, and I could trip over the ball, especially when Brock sent one my way when I wasn't looking. The highlight of gym class, however, came when Mr. Valentine was showing us how to do layups. He slipped on something on the floor and went down with a long, drawn-out ripping sound like someone was tearing a towel in half. When he stood up, his pants had ripped all the way up his backside. I think most of us were interested to note that he wore purple boxers with flowers on them. His face flared as purple as his shorts. He backed up to the wall and into his office, shouting at us to keep playing. Maybe he thought if he shouted loud enough, we wouldn't notice the pretty white flowers. It didn't work. Still, who could concentrate on shooting after that? He came out 10 minutes later with his pants all patched up with duct tape. The only more or less normal teacher I had was Mr. Hipple for algebra. Well, he had a weird name, and he looked like a bullfrog standing on its back legs, but he already knew us all by name and started right in on his lesson. Somehow he made math interesting. Sounds impossible, but he did. After he got past the big belly that sagged over his belt and the way he put his hands in his back pockets while he talked, he was all right. I left school with a bag full of books and a pile of homework, thinking that it could prove to be an interesting year, even if animal lookalikes populated the school and I didn't have any real friends yet. I found the dentist's office without much trouble, and I was soon reclining in the chair, blinking at the blinding light that shone overhead like the spotlight of doom. The dentist came in to give me a shot to deaden my mouth before he could yank out a few of my teeth. "You'll feel a little pinch," he said. Then he took this huge needle the size of a toothpick and jabbed it into my gums. Pinch? I think the dentist needed to go back to English class or pick up a dictionary at the very least. He was not very precise in his use of words. Pinch? It would have been more accurate for him to say, "You are going to feel prolonged pain and suffering as if someone has just stabbed a knife into your jaw and is trying to scratch a hole in your bone. And I'm going to do this 3 or 4 times." That would have been an accurate description. He left me to stare into the light until I saw spots, and he came back and said, "How does it feel?" I shrugged. "The same?" I said. He frowned. Okay." He picked up the needle again and gave me 2 more shots while I tried not to scream. He came back 10 minutes later with the same question. "The same?" I said. He shook his head. "Not after that much lidocaine." He called the assistant in and picked up a pair of the weirdest pliers ever created. "You'll feel some pressure," he said. Well, I felt every tooth being ripped out of my head by its roots. I think I screamed, but I'm not sure. All I know is that my whole body was sore for a week. The dentist's sweat dripped onto my shirt, and I know I heard him say a few words that my delicate ears should not have heard. The tooth extraction took a whole lot longer than it was supposed to, so I hurried home with a wad of blood-soaked packing in my mouth to get my papers. I had to hurry because it was the end of the month, and I needed to collect money from the subscribers, while still leaving enough time to get my cameras before dark. Some of the people just put the fee on their doors for me, but most made me stop and knock. On my way to my route, something strange began to happen to my face. The whole right side just slid off of my skull. I mean, 1 minute it was there and the next it was gone. I glanced down to see if it had fallen into my shoulder or something. It hadn't. I reached up a hand to touch it. It was the strangest thing in the world to be able to feel my own flesh with my fingers, while the flesh I was touching couldn't feel a thing. The first couple of subscribers weren't home, so I knocked until Mrs. Larson answered her door. She was a kind old lady who always gave me a tip. I smiled and tried to talk, but I found that my entire tongue had turned into a block of wood. Her eyes opened wide as I blinked and tried to ask for the money. A terrified look spread across her face and she backed away from me, shaking her head. I couldn't understand what was wrong with her. After looking around to see if some terrorist or alien was standing behind me, I put a hand to my face to see if I couldn't make it work somehow. When I brought it down, it was covered with bloody slobber. I looked down to find that the bloody slobber had dribbled down my neck into my white t-shirt and spread into a soggy, bloody mess on my chest. I looked up again just as she slammed the door. Well, I wasn't going to get any collecting done today, not running around looking like some zombie of the apocalypse. I delivered my papers and decided to collect my cameras. I was going to pull them all down to see if any of the other cameras had recorded anything. They were all numbered, and I kept careful records of where I had placed them, and where my pictures came from. I ditched my bike in the usual place and headed up the narrow trail that led into the swampy area where I had been placing my cameras for about a month now. The forest smelled of pine and decay. The shadowy coolness enfolded me as I ducked under the branches. I had collected 4 of my cameras before I saw the blood on the trail. It was a big clot that splashed over the leaves like something was bleeding real bad. I panicked. For one terrifying moment, I thought it had come from me, that somehow I had slobbered a big glob of blood onto the trail and that I was bleeding to death. Then I saw more splashes of red leading up the trail. I breathed a sigh of relief. Maybe I wouldn't bleed to death today, but something had been bleeding. I followed the bloody trail of overturned leaves and disturbed moss, trying to decide what this could be. I was trying so hard not to think of the skinned coyote and the corpse in that bag that I almost stepped on the body.